Oh, good. It changed my name.
All right, so welcome to our second session of week 3. It's good to have our steady little group here in class. So Tricia, Lori, Sean, and Terry are in the classroom. And maybe we'll have, it seems like sometimes we have a few others drop in during our 2-hour section here. So we'll see how that goes. But hopefully we have quite a bit to go over today, but a lot of it is covering the thoughts about human-centered design, and then a few other things. So let's just get started here and take a look at our agenda. Hey, Thomas. Let's see, did we lose? I think I lost my window. All right, are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
I see the title slide.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do this. It's making me a little nervous the way that it's acting here. So, okay, we'll just do like this and share the desktop. All right, so our agenda for today. Just a few minutes of recap and sharing time if there's anybody that has something they want to share and talk about. Any Q&A on week 3's assignments at all, anything specific that you guys want to talk about. Then we'll continue a little bit with the talking about the assignment, planning the design. We'll talk a little bit more about icon design since we were not able to put that, go over that on Tuesday. And then we'll move into human-centered design, user experience and user interface, kind of preparing you guys for the quiz. And then, like I mentioned before, I'll talk a little bit about our weekend appointments. We're going to have to make some changes from what I planned on Tuesday. So we'll wrap up with that, and we're going to have to be done by 7 exactly, because I've got another meeting right after class today. So, all right. So first of all, just recapping on assignment 2. Anybody who is still in the process of finishing that or going to submit it this week, or any of you that want to do any revisions or resubmissions, make sure that you take a look at the notes, any PDF notes and the rubric comments. I put up a little video in the announcements that shows how you see those in your gradebook if you are wondering about that. So you can just go to that little demo in the announcements. The critique that we had on Tuesday, I think, could also be really helpful for additional pointers. You can learn from other people's projects as well, if you're going to do any revisions or if you're still working on that project.
Should I turn in my PDF since I turned in my Illustrator file?
Yeah, I mean, you can see in the rubric how many points you missed on that, and so if you feel like it's worth it, you can make a resubmission.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, the thing that I kind of highlighted in bold here is I only accept 1 resubmission for a regrade, because of time constraints. I can't, keep regrading things. So, you can evaluate and see if you feel like it's worth making a resubmission and gain a few points, depending on what you got deducted for.
I think it was like a 116.
Okay, so yeah, so just decide what you can make your own kind of decision on that.
Okay.
But I just recommend that if you do a resubmission, you kind of go through and double check everything so that, if the file format was wrong, you make sure you submit it in the right format, file format the second time. And, those little tiny check things that, you might have overlooked before, just make sure that your resubmission gets you as many new points as possible.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. It was a 116, so
okay.
PDF would, I don't know what it would do, but Yeah.
Okay. All right. Also, just think about if you want to, any more feedback, you can maybe even check with your AD or FPA, since you probably sent them a Behance link. And if you revise it, you might want to update your Behance link as well. And, also, if you don't feel like you want to go back and keep spending time on this assignment, remember that you can always keep working on it even after the class is over, to get it looking a bit sharper for your portfolio. So that was just a reminder on that. And then anything that you guys found interesting so far in your readings, in the daily checkpoints, or in your research? Anybody want to share anything that they have noticed or been thinking about this week?
I read the whole thing about the human-centered design. For me, I kind of put it all out in my discussion.
Okay.
Of what I felt about it. Really interesting concept. Actually, really simple, but I know for me, I probably do 2 of the 3.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, sometimes it's the kind of approach that naturally, as a creative person, you might have that kind of approach, but it's an approach that's starting to kind of work its way into more traditional business applications, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But it really is, a mindset that's very helpful, something that you kind of need to have as a designer, but it's also helpful in a lot of other areas of industry and business, and just dealing with life in general, I think. So we're going to go into depth a little bit more about those different principles there, dig a little deeper into some of those websites that were referred to in the readings. Okay. Any other thing that you're wondering about for this week's assignment? We're going to go over icons, but if there's anything else from last lecture that you still have questions about or anything like that?
With this week's assignment, would it be better to hand draw what you want your icons to be, or would it be better to try to do it in Illustrator?
Well, it's always good to sketch. I always encourage people to sketch. But you're going to need to have so you can always include that as well, start with sketching. But for the assignment for this week, you do need to have those icons created in Illustrator so that you can use them in your project next week. So does that make sense? So you can start with sketching if you want to, which I think is a good idea. But then from there, move them into Illustrator so you have them ready for next week. If you end up not having them in Illustrator quite yet, you'll be docked a few points for that. And you can always just stick your sketches in there instead and then finalize them next week. But there's quite a bit of work still to do next week. So, the more you can get done preparation this week, the better. And it will help your grade this week a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, clear on that? Any
Yes.
other questions? Nobody else? Nothing from Lori, nothing from Terry?
I actually have one myself.
Okay.
When you were talking about the logos, I'm just gonna go ahead and do Walmart. But would it be okay if we went with a retro logo compared to their new logo?
What's your rationale for using the retro logo?
Well, the retro logo was the smiley face compared to the sunshine that Walmart's using now.
Oh, like for their icon?
Yeah, well, yeah, their icon now is like the sun-looking thing, and their retro logo was the smiley face. So can I put the both logos in there, or do I need to stick to their new logo?
Well, part of your plan is going to include that you want to stick with the branding of the store. So if you're feeling like you want to play on that concept with the smiley face and that's you in the branding and in the user interface that you're designing, then I guess that fills that purpose. But then stick with that older logo so you can keep it brand consistent. So that's mostly, I would encourage you to use the updated logo, because if you're going to show it in your portfolio, then it will look like a little bit more updated. But if that's a concept that you've already kind of gotten hooked on and really want to work on, that it really matters to you to have that smiley face, then you could stick with that older branding. Just be consistent. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
Okay. Lori, you were mentioning the more info on the rubric can help. What were you referring to there?
When you look at the rubric, it says, I think it's view a longer description.
Oh, yeah. And then it has all the little points. Oh, you were talking
Yeah.
about the things to check if you're resubmitting.
Right, because it goes into a little bit more detail. It's like,
yeah, exactly. So we can take a look at that
yeah,
here.
that's just what I mentioned.
Yeah, okay. So just so everybody knows. So here, if this is assignment 2 here, if you go here and look at the view the longer description, then it has some bullets right here. And this is usually where you get knocked a few points if there's one of these things that are not followed or included in here. So that kind of breaks down the points. So, all right. Well, thanks for kind of reminding everybody about that. Okay. Well, then let's get back into week 3 and the stuff that you guys are working on this week. So this is kind of a reminder slide about your assignment for this week, the planning of a user-friendly interface. So for this week, you're going to do your strategy plan and your icons. So you're going to choose a brand from one of the 3 categories. You only choose one store. There's 3 different categories. Each category has 2 choices, and but you just choose one store, okay? So you choose a brand. I think where the choices are Target, Walmart for big stores, Home Depot and Lowe's for home improvement stores, or Michael's or Hobby Lobby for a craft store. And when you download, let's go to that assignment here. When you download the document, that's the documents that are listed there. Let's see. Okay, so there's actually they're listed right here. Each one of them have 5 different sections, and these are the ones that you need to create the icons for. You can find the logo for the store right there. And then your download has that Illustrator file where those departments are listed as well. So you can have those for reference there as well. And the Illustrator file right here has a pre-designed store map for you that you can use. If you want to modify that a little bit, you can feel free to do it. You don't get any extra creative points or anything for it. So it's just up to if you feel like that fits your purpose better. But remember to keep it simple and easy to understand for the user. Okay, so what you're going to do is choose the brand, sketch out the flow, in other words, the 4 different required screens, and just kind of decide what content you want to have in each one of those screens. That can be a done roughly just in an Illustrator document or InDesign document, or you can hand sketch it as well. Then you're going to design your 5 icons and then save all the plan as a PDF and turn that in for your week 3 assignments. So make sure that you do your research here, you study the brand, you think of the user experience, picture yourself standing in front of that kiosk, moving, touching the screen, and how the process would be for you to find your product that you're looking for. So think about the floor plan, and of course always consider design principles, both in the design of the different windows and in your icons. So no questions on this again then, right? This is a little bit simpler than last week, or than the first plan that you did, I guess. So here are the requirements, and on Tuesday I kind of just did a little rough mock-up for you to kind of give you an idea of how it could turn out. But again, I didn't use any hand sketches in this one, but if you want to do that, you can include that. All right, so now let's start talking a little bit more about your icon design, because that's kind of the bigger part of the project that you're working on this week. So icons, also known as symbols many times, they are created to communicate instructions, ideas, and actions. So a lot of this information that we're going to talk about here, you can also find in the Linda videos that are in your readings. There is 4 different ones, and we'll talk about some of the stuff they cover and a little bit more here. So how do you feel like icons are different than text? What's the different effect that an icon can have compared to text for a person?
Well, icons are more of, what's the word? I guess a visual expression of the text.
Mm-hmm.
Just something more on the lines that you can, instead of having to read, that you can actually just see the picture and go.
Yeah, exactly. Can you guys think of some common icons that you encounter in your everyday use, just out and about, or on the internet, or using your phone, or even in the classroom?
I mean,
Can you guys think of anything?
I mean, traffic signs.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of traffic signs. There's like the little stop hand and the walking man, right, for your crosswalks. So many different ones, right? Anything else you can think of? Like if we just take a look, let's just take a look at our classroom here. And on my screen here, where can you guys see some icons?
The published sign, the edit symbol.
So the little pencil for the edit, right? So a lot of times to help communicate the information, there can be an icon and some text. Okay, so what about these things over here? All of these are icons, right? And so some of these we kind of learn and we get used to. Other ones are really, kind of just commonplace that people just naturally understand. You can see how they're repeated. This little pencil icon right here is over here, but it's also over here, right? So this means edit. Becomes a very commonly understandable icon. Yep, trash and zoom and write. And how about all of these little icons for all of my different applications, right? So I've got my messages, I got my calendar. These are icons for each one of the software products. My mail, this icon for Illustrator, right? So lots of different icons that we deal with in an interface, right? There's icons up here. Like this is a very common search icon that is used on a lot of things. You probably have a ton of icons on your phones, right? So we communicate a lot in icons these days. And even like emojis, emojis. They're icons, right? What do they represent?
Different emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Emotions and feelings. And why do you think that they have become so popular, or why they're kind of helpful in today's communication?
Because people don't want to type too much.
Yeah, it's fast. Exactly. And also, sometimes it's hard, right? When you're typing out, it's hard to be able to convey what your emotion is. Sometimes, you can't hear sarcasm, you can't hear intonation in a person's voice, all of those kinds of things, right? When you're just typing, texting, messaging. And so the emojis help clarify the communication, doesn't it? Right? So, for example, if you're saying something a little bit sarcastically or tongue-in-cheek or as a joke to somebody, and then you put your little wink face after or your little happy face after, they know that you're just joking, right? Otherwise, it could be misunderstood. So I think those emojis are really effective that way. And now they're just, so prolific. It's, when I use my phone, I start typing and they pop up for me so I could use symbols instead of some of the words, and I can just kind of talk in emojis if I want to. And that could also become a little complex, I guess. But I think basically the way that they started being added, just using punctuation marks, was for people to be able to express themselves more clearly, for the information to be more accurate when people were communicating, right? Okay, so, and you might have in your daily checkpoints gone through some of the information that was in there, talking about symbols, and it's also in one of these Linda videos, talking about symbols and how they were actually the most ancient language, right? So let's see. I was going to watch that video, but I think that I won't sacrifice that time. But the video that's called Power of Icons, that one talks about that. It talks about the ancient languages of pictographs. You guys have probably seen those, in ancient places. Let's see if I can drag it out here and maybe kind of find it. You can see that that's how communication actually started way back in the day. I think it's maybe over here somewhere. But you guys have seen pictographs, petroglyphs, think about Egyptian hieroglyphics, things like that, right? Those were pictures that symbolize different words or meanings or actions. And so basically they were icons or pictographs, right? So that was like the beginning of communication. And now we're kind of back to using that same type of language again, coming back to that. Why do you think that is happening? Why do you think people are, so to speak, reverting to a different form of those glyphs and icons to communicate? Yeah, like a caveman. How come you think that it's becoming more and more popular? And what kind of benefit does it have to us in a modern society? Some of it is the same benefit that it had way back when, but there are some new benefits that have been added to it that they probably didn't think of back when they first started it. Faster, easier.
I guess in the end, it makes it simpler to express communication or finding new ways to express yourself without having to really use too many words and making it as short and sweet as possible.
Yeah, so it's very instant and very quick. And the other thing that I think is interesting that both Terry and Lori was mentioning here in the chat is it's a universal language. And so more and more, we are becoming a universe or an international society, right? We communicate with people in different places of the world with different languages all the time through internet interactions and all of this stuff. And so those icons are becoming an international language that anybody can understand. So whether it's signage and you're traveling in different places, it's helpful. You know, people are traveling a lot more now than they did back in the caveman days, right? Also, if you think about websites or any kind of web communication, that needs to be adjusted and designed so that a person anywhere in the world can access it, you know? So we talked about the internet access when we created our infographic, and so we realized that how the internet is spread throughout the world and people are using it everywhere, and so those communications can't really be bound by language. We need to be able to find things and communicate things in some type of universal language, and icons is becoming that language. So, all right, so good pointers there. Okay, so when you are going to create any type of icons, and you know, we're talking about a few that we're just gonna designate some different sections of a store here, but the same principles apply to any type of icon design, which is actually becoming something very prolific along with infographics for a designer to have to do, since that's, you know, communication is moving towards that a lot. You need to think about what kind of icons you are designing. So there's kind of three different types of icons. There's pictograms, which are visual representations of actual objects. There is ideograms, which represent ideas or thoughts and actions, and they're sometimes a little bit more abstract. And then there's also arbitrary icons, which are kind of invented symbols that people have to kind of learn to know what they are, because just looking at them, they might not exactly be what you think they are. But, you know, as people get used to them, they kind of learn what they are. So for example, you know, like the Illustrator icon right here, you know, if you didn't know Adobe and you didn't know Illustrator, you wouldn't know what it is. But as soon as you know that, then this becomes a very familiar icon to you. One thing that you need to think about when you're designing icons is that you want to use established conventions for clear communication. This is not the time to be extremely unique or different. You want to design things that are easily recognizable and that people can connect with very quickly, and that they don't have to do a lot of thinking or figuring things out, because then the icon kind of becomes obsolete. It's all about getting things quickly. Also, many times you will be designing icons as a set. You will be in this exercise here. And so you're going to be doing 5 icons. And anytime you design a set of icons that are going to be shown together, you want to be sure that they feel cohesive, that they kind of have some of the same attributes and weights and lines and types of shapes to them, so that they feel cohesive. And you also want to make sure that they are consistent with any kind of branding that you're doing. So that's something that you're going to be thinking about for your assignment. You want to reduce all of the shapes to the very most essential shapes. Some of the reasons for that is sizing. A lot of times icons have to be, you know, quite small, so you don't want them to be too complex, because then they're hard to understand. It also makes it a lot quicker for your brain to register if there isn't that many details in them. Another thing to think about is that you need to have some kind of shapes or something in the icon that's different instead of only color. Because people with color blindness, if color is the only difference that you're have in, you know, how an icon is like functioning or working, or if it's selected or not selected and that kind of stuff, then sometimes that can be very hard for a colorblind person to distinguish. So it's good to add something else to it. On a website where something is responsive, you can always kind of just make it bigger or smaller or something like that. But think about that too in icon design. All right. Any questions so far here?
When making an icon, would you stick more to, let's say a black and white, or would you try to stick to, let's say, a neutral color for someone with color blindness? Let's say like a yellow and like an orange, like colors that can be distinctly different?
Well, that kind of depends on the purpose of your icon and how you're using it. A lot of times colors will help with identifying things or keeping things consistent with the brand, or creating hierarchy and those kinds of things. And a lot of times color coding is also helpful, like you guys are doing in the map, right? Where, for example, everywhere you show data on Africa, it was always orange, right? Or, you know, or something like that. So many times icons, having different colors of icons, can also help you categorize things that way. And then color is very useful. But when you are designing the icon itself and you're just thinking about the shapes and things, and we'll look at this here a little further as well, I suggest that you start by just designing it in black and white so that you really can tell those different shapes. And then if you need to color it later on, depending on how you're using it, then that's fine. But starting to design something in black and white is really going to help you define those shapes. And let's see if it brings us to, there's another slide here later on that talks more about that. Okay, so some tips for successful icon design, and some of these are in those videos as well. And the media articles that are in the classroom are also really helpful for this. So let's remember that you have a couple of articles here in week 3. Oh, here in the course media. Come on. So in week 3, there's a couple of articles here. Here, there's this one right here on top icon design, and this one here, better icon design in 6 easy steps. This one is pretty good too. It has some illustrations that maybe we'll keep open so you guys can look at those. But this one has like 6 easy steps, and I think the steps are always helpful, you know. So this one talks about structure, character, identity, which are 3 different aspects of an icon that are really important. And then it has the 6 steps that I kind of just simplified over here in the in this bullet list. So using a grid is going to help you keep things consistent and concise. So you can always turn on the grid option on your Illustrator document and kind of keep that grid, help you keep things cohesive. Using simple geometric shapes is always very helpful. Using this Gestalt theory, positive and negative space. I don't know how much you guys have talked about that in your other classes. If you've had logo design, probably your graphic design classes, you've talked about some of these things. So I'll kind of remind you of that when we work with our example. Think about having consistent design elements. So if we go down to the part that covers that in this, here you can see how he's kind of using the grid to make sure that they're even. Okay, starting with simple geometric shapes. So here, you know, it's going to create this really cute little fox, but it started with just these 2 ovals and 2 triangles to just kind of fill into the space. And then what was I talking about here? Oh, consistent design elements. That's right. So the other thing too that's important, this helps really with the consistency that I was talking about, since you guys are creating 5 different icons, is think about like angles and curves, and kind of try to make those as consistent as possible. And when they're hand drawn, sometimes they get like a little bit inconsistent. But here you can see that you can go in and actually kind of do it by the pixel, and that really helps as well. So for example, are you having pointed corners on, you know, on any kind of straight angles, or are you doing rounded corners? Keep those kind of things consistent. All right. So right here, for example, if you have consistent design elements across the icons, then that makes a very cohesive look to it. You can see these 3 different icons right here has this same little design element that's repeated, the little notch. Okay, so it's in all different places. So keeping, if you have any kind of line work, keeping that consistent width and thickness, and also again having either sharp corners or rounded corners on all of them, is going to keep them consistent. Remember that icons are not pictures, they're not images. You know, don't try to be super detailed, it's not going to help it. You know, think about the very essentials of the shape that makes the object or the thing that you're communicating recognizable, because that's the most important aspect of an icon, and it must be easily recognizable. If it isn't, and if people kind of have to fight to figure out what it means, then it loses its effectiveness. So because it is that simplified language that crosses language barriers, so kind of try to think about it outside of your own conventions. So the process for doing effective icon design is to research, look at all kinds of other icons, look at the objects that you're going to choose, you know, think about what they look like, exploring and sketching, of course. And then you might want to test your designs, either in the sketching stage or in a rough stage. And don't say anything about it, and show it to somebody that doesn't know what you're doing, and say, what do you think these 5 icons mean? And of course, if you're in the context of being in the store, it's going to probably help you a little bit more than if you're just looking at it randomly. But it will give you at least a little bit of feedback to see how effective they are.
So with the icons, are they going to be more implemented for, let's say, the register, or are we just talking about icons that can be used like throughout the store?
You're designing these icons to be in the user interface for that kiosk that you're designing.
Okay.
That's what they're going to be used for. So they're going to identify the different departments either on the map or in a search menu or something like that.
Right. I kind of went in my mind like.
So, and I'm thinking, you know, if you expanded this project and you created signage and all kinds of other things for it, then the idea would probably be to use the same icons again on the signage or on, you know, sales tags or information pamphlets or whatever else you might use. But you're only going to use them in the user interface on the kiosk. That's what you're creating them for.
Okay, so because I was just sitting here thinking, like, do you do one like for games, or are you setting up like icons put on a register to like touch to like to explore different things like produce or electronics or.
So it's going to, your kiosk user interface design that you're creating is going to be pretty much, you know, find your way, a wayfinding thing for the store, like where do I find groceries, or where do I, you know, look for a hammer, or whatever whatever you're looking for. And so that's what the user interface is going to do. And so these icons are going to be helpful for those different departments. They're going to signify the different departments that that are on that list. So let's see,
Okay.
let's go back to the assignment here. So you have this list right here, right? So your icons, if you choose one of the superstores, say, let's say you're doing Walmart, you're going to create one icon for grocery, one for home products, one for pharmacy, one for apparel, and one for electronics. And then depending on what store you've chosen, you have 5 icons listed here for you to use. So you don't have to make that decision. Just go with the stuff that you've been given and focus your energy on what they're going to look like.
Okay.
Okay. So, and you know, that's why we've kind of outlined this project for you this way, is because we don't want you to focus on the whole theory of, you know, you don't have to do more designing, you know, just kind of keep thinking, just focus on the designing that you have to do, and, you know, don't try to overcomplicate the project. Most of the time when you're a designer, it's not going to be up to you. You know, some of the decisions are not going to be up to you. You're going to be given certain information and you have to work within those parameters. So that's kind of what we're trying to simulate here for you. Okay, so is that clear to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's compare a little bit here. Simple icon design compared to complex icon design. What do you think are some of the aspects of simple icon design? What makes a simple icon?
Something easy to read or to comprehend.
Yeah, and what are some of the benefits of a simple icon compared to a complex icon?
I mean, everybody should be able to get a simple icon. I mean, a bag could easily represent grocery, or
Yeah,
dinner can represent, you know, hardware.
exactly. So quick comprehension, that's one of the biggest benefits. Yeah. And it's another one is that it's easy to colorize, right? So if you're gonna change colors on it, or if you're, you know, using anything like that, it doesn't have too many shades, it doesn't have gradients, it doesn't have, you know, any kind of complex color combination. It's just easy to colorize, maybe sticking to 1 or 2, I would say absolute maximum of 3 colors. A simple icon design is also flexible to use. Okay, so if it has a very simple design, you could use it, and, you know, it has to do with the easy colorization. It will be easy to either, you know, have it on a screen, or print it on a piece of paper, or make it in a lighted sign or something like that. So it's easy to transfer it into different media. And it really helps scaling as well, like we talked about. If it has too many details, it becomes hard to recognize when it's scaled. So then in contrast, a complex icon design has a lot of distracting details. So it takes the brain a lot longer to register what it's for. The complicated colors or any kind of gradients or anything like that makes it hard to reproduce, makes it hard again also, you know, it's a little bit distracting, makes it difficult to adapt to different uses, and it inhibits scaling. So you can see that definitely the simple icon design is what's preferred and that we really need to think about. So this just kind of cuts down to the core of what a simple icon is compared to a complex one. All right, so thinking about that, using shapes versus lines, why do you think it's better to use shapes instead of line drawings when it comes to icons? If you think about that simplicity rule. are shapes usually more solid than lines are? Yeah, it's not like a graph at all. But think about if you think about a, what's the difference between the walking sign, with a man that's walking, the little silhouette of the man that's walking, crosswalk, traffic sign, and a hand-sketched pencil drawing of a person's face. Okay, there's a big difference in detail, right? So the silhouette or the shape, the flat shape, is much easier to recognize quickly. If you have a pencil drawing with all little shadings and outlines and things that are, trying to be realistic, that kind of stuff, you have lots of little tiny pieces of information that the mind has to process. You have lots of different shades of dark and light. You have small, thicker strokes and thinner strokes and all of that kind of stuff. All of that takes time for the brain to process compared to a simple shape on a simple background. That's only two different things that the mind has to process. And the simpler, the fewer angles and little details and little things sticking out on that silhouette also makes it a lot more easy for the brain to recognize, right? So that is what we talk about when we talk about figure-ground relationship. The flat thing on top and the ground on the back, the fewer components that design has, so to speak, the quicker it is going to be for the mind to process it. So let's do a little playing in Illustrator to kind of help you realize what this is about. The other thing that I want to remind you of when you're creating effective icons is if you're doing something that is an object reference, find an image. Don't rely on memory. Why do you think it's important that we look at an image or an actual object rather than just thinking, oh, I know what that looks like?
Proportion.
Proportion, that's very important, yep, because that has a lot to do with that recognizability, right? And how good are we really at remembering all those kinds of details? I think if we don't have an actual object and something visual to reference to, we might be missing some of those kind of seeming smaller details, but that really makes things different. Like, what's the difference between a hammer and a mallet? How do they look different, for example? And if we don't have those references, then sometimes we just assume things, and then we come at it from a lot more of a subjective nature, because it's just whatever we're used to or whatever we remember. But if we look at images or we look at actual objects, we get a objective view of what that thing looks like. And that's probably going to connect with more people, right? Okay, so as we're going to create this with shapes, the Illustrator Shape Builder is going to be a nice tool to use. You can also use the Pathfinder to unite different shapes, and we're going to look at cutouts too. So this is what I'm going to do in the demo. So I just kind of kept the slide here so I would remember what to show. So let's open up an Illustrator document and start looking at kind of the process or the steps that I would recommend that you do as you're working on different icons. Okay, so first of all, we want to think of some type of reference image. And just for the heck of it, let's say that I'm going to do the home improvement store. So I'm going to do lumber, paint, tools, yard, garden, and electrical. So you could maybe start making some type of list of objects that you think fit into these different categories. let's see. I wonder if it copies and pastes from here. Yeah. So maybe I'll make a little bit of a list here. Oh, what am I doing? And electrical. Okay, so 5, right? So under this list, I could start listing different things. So now I'm in Illustrator, so it's not going to do a great list here, actually. But under lumber, can you guys think of what type of objects might be good for lumber?
A plank of wood.
Like a piece of wood, or
An axe, or
okay, and I would just, you know, come up with lots of different ideas. You can always just cut them out later on. An axe, or maybe nails, or a house, because you build things, you know. So just list a bunch of ideas that you might have for each one of these different categories. So maybe for paint, you would put, you know, you could have a bucket, brush. Brush could be one idea.
a roller.
Yeah, bucket, roller. That way you don't just struggle with one object when you're trying to make all 5 of these kind of feel the same, but you could maybe have, you know, as you're working on these ideas, maybe you have 2 different options for your paint section. And then once you have all of the icons designed, you can kind of choose which one is going to work the best. So under tools, you might have, you know, here you could have a hammer, you could have a
wrench.
Yeah, you could have like a wrench, is that spelled right? Or a saw. You know, you could keep on with different things there. Could be, what could you have for yard and garden? You could have a rake. You could have a plant, flower. What else can you think of?
Grass.
Yeah, grass. Maybe a shovel. Okay. Dirt. Yep. And then, you know, once you make that list, you'll probably start thinking about, well, which type of objects work the best kind of across this way, and feel like they're more kind of consistent in use for each one of them. So dirt is a little bit hard. You know, how easy is it for people to recognize a pile of dirt compared to grass growing, for example? And then under electrical, maybe you would put like a plug.
Or like a radio or a TV.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's electronics, then it could be like a TV, or it could be like a light bulb maybe.
You can use a voltage symbol.
Yeah, or yeah, just like a bolt, like a lightning bolt, right? Something like that. Okay, so lots of different, you know, come up with some different ideas and do a little bit of idea generation before you decide exactly what you're gonna do for each one of the icons. Then once you've decided on the icons, you know, look, that article showed like decide some kind of grid or decide some kind of consistent shape that you want to keep that icon within. So that could be like a circle, or it could be a rounded rectangle, square, or one, you know, if you want it to be, you know, something with sharper corners, you know, and maybe oblong, long and skinny, whatever. Usually consistent shapes that are either round or square, that are the same tall and wide, become a little bit easier to use as icons than some that are directional. So I'll suggest a square instead. If you hold down your shift key, when you create any of these shapes, it's going to keep it completely like square or completely circular. So, all right, so decide what type of constraints you want to keep your icon in, and then keep that consistent on all of them. So if you decide on a circle, have all 5 of them be circles, and so forth. All right, then when you start actually designing the symbol that's going to be inside of here, then one of the tips was to keep really simple shapes, kind of like you saw how they started that fox out with just some triangles and ovals. So for example, if I was to say that I wanted to do a plant maybe for my yard and garden, and I would do this to, you know, even as you're researching and trying to deciding on all of these different words, whatever symbol you want to use, do a little research and think about what does a young plant look like. So I'm going to just look up images of seedlings. Okay, so here they are growing in the dirt. This is kind of what they look like. 2 little leaves, you know, that's maybe not what I would have pictured normally in my head. So that's why it's good that I have this little reference right here. Maybe I want to put it in a pot. Whoops, in a pot. It found it anyway. All right, so there's a little seedling in a pot. That's kind of simple. That feels like kind of a good reference image for me. So I'm just going to actually just, that's one that I have to purchase if I want the whole thing, but I'm just going to use it as a reference. So I'm going to just save that image and keep it handy as I work on my is it this one? Yep, as I work on my design. Okay, so I just have it here in front of me so I can kind of remember, you know, some of the characteristics of this pot and the seedling. What are some of the characteristics that I could use here that maybe makes people identify with it? Can you guys think about that when you're looking at this design?
I mean, the plant itself.
Yeah, the little plant itself. It just has 2 leaves, right? And a stem. So that's not too difficult to create with some simple shapes. I'm just going to take the ellipses and I'm going to just make this little leaf kind of an oval like that. And I'm going to drag another oval, and we're going to move them and adjust them here in a little bit. Okay. And then maybe for the stem, I will just draw a little line. I'll just draw it with this brush here. Okay, so now I have those components. What could I use for the pot, just for a shape? I can just use a rectangle to start with, right? I can just use this little rectangle right here. I'm just going to fill it in flat again, so I'm just using shapes and not lines. And then I'm going to take my direct selection tool, just move these 2 points. I'm going to just use my arrow tool and go like, to keep it consistent, I'm going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps to that side, and do the opposite over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now I know that that's even and balanced. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. And then maybe proportionate to the plant here. I want to make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So now if I have these, looking at these, and kind of moving them together here. You can go in and kind of adjust some of these angles a little bit with your tools if you want to. For example, I can use this anchor point tool to make the ends of these leaves a little pointed, maybe. They feel a little bit more like leaves if I do that. Okay, now you can see it all as, it's just all one shape, right? Let's actually make this a little bit wider so that it feels a little bit more consistent with the rest of the shapes. You can see this as just one shape, right? Pretty simple. If they were, oh, that's line work. If they were done as lines, how much more complex would the design be? Much more complex, right? Especially if this line was also a lot thinner. Right? Because you have to look at both the line and your mind has to fill in the inside. So now all of a sudden, instead of this being one shape, it's actually two things that you kind of have to look at. Right? And same thing, if I go back, same thing if you add some kind of stroke to this, or let's say you make it green and then you put a black stroke on it. Let's make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. Now I've added more complexity to this symbol than I had before, right? Because I have, now there's two things that the mind has. The mind has to look at the stroke and the fill color instead of before. And then it separates these two leaves a lot more and the little plant from the pot than when everything was just one color or one shape. You guys see the difference there? How this is a simple icon and this way it's a complex icon. Okay, so see that difference? All right. Now the other thing that you want to do, now once you feel like you have your design all settled on, then you might want to combine all of these shapes into one. And that's where our little handy dandy shape builder tool is really helpful. And if you can only do it with shapes though. So you have to select the shapes. And if you select the shapes, these two are touching, so we can use those together. And then we click our shape builder tool. It's going to kind of highlight it when we hover over it. And then we can just drag our mouse between the two. And then it creates one shape out of those. Okay, it should anyway.
And that'll do that with the line too, right?
Yeah, so it won't, and it didn't do it. I'm not sure why here. Come on. There we go. No, it connected it. Can you see how it's just one shape now? If I hover over it, it's not two separate shapes, it's just one shape. It's not going to do it with a line because that's not actually a shape. You can see if I select the line and I use my shape tool, it's not going to do that. It's not going to hover over the line. Why is that? So that's because that's a stroke, it's not a shape. What can we do to create a shape out of this stroke? Anybody know?
It's not like a converting the outline.
It is, well, kind of. It's kind of like you do with text when you convert it to outlines or create outlines. If you go under path, you can go to outline stroke. And then it changes it. You can see now it's a shape, right? Before it was a stroke because it has the line in the middle. And then if I go to object, path, and outline stroke, it creates a shape instead. And so now I can select that and my leaves and my pot, and I can use my shape builder tool to drag these together, drag it over here, and drag it over here. And now it's just all one shape is all. Very simple to use and simple to handle. If you get frustrated with the shape builder tool, you can always do it the old school way with the Pathfinder. Let's see here. The Pathfinder. We have it right here. And so let's go back. Well, let's go back to this stage because you want to have a shape still. You want to have all the different pieces shapes, but you can shift click. So you click all three of them and then use this command right here, which is called unite, and click it. And then it also becomes one shape. So that's another way to do it. All right. So once you have your one little shape created, just remember that once you've created one shape out of it, you can't go in and make changes. So unless you're super decided, what I usually do is that I create an extra copy just in case. Okay, so just using my Alt key right there to make another copy. That way, if I have this one all joined, whoops. Why did it do that, by the way?
Yeah, I
I had
missed.
this selected, and then I did Pathfinder. What happened? See what went weird with my stem right there?
You have an outline on it?
That's right. I did not have an outline. It was still a stroke. See that? So I got to make sure that I think I went back too many steps there. So now it does it. So, but I saved this version right here so that maybe if I wanted to make this stroke thicker, I could, or thinner. Or maybe I want to make it a little bit shorter, because what I'm thinking about is I'm going to have this be inside of a circle. And if my symbol is tall and skinny, it's not going to fit that well inside the circle. I want it to be a little bit more even in height and width than that. So I just moved my pot up to make the little plant stem shorter. So I'm going to save that one down here. It's an old option. I'm going to take this one, and now I have to remember to change this object to, well, I'm going to see. I'm going to save this so I have an extra version as well. It's so easy to do. So it's always better to have extra versions than it is to. Okay, so now I have this little pod. It's not going to fit inside of the circle, so I'm going to make it smaller. So let's see. Let's zoom in on this area right here a little bit now. And just for our own sake, make the circle a little bit bigger. And so I'm just gonna give this a color so we can see it. And maybe I'll decide to use green later on too, because that seems very identifiable with the yard and garden, right? You can see now that because it's a little bit shorter and it's more equal in height and width, it fits in that circle a lot better than this old one right here. Let's say, even if I shrunk it down, when it's in the circle, the space around it doesn't feel as even as it does with this one here. That's a little bit, you know, it gets really wide on the sides and there isn't that much space on the top and the bottom. But this one here, I get a more even distribution of space, right? So this is when we talk about positive and negative space. Sometimes it's also called figure ground. If you're looking at the symbol, what is the figure and what is the ground?
Wouldn't the ground be the circle?
The ground would be the circle. That's the background, right? So you can always think about it. Ground is the background. And the figure is usually the object, whatever you're looking at. So that's the pot. And if we're talking about positive and negative space, usually the positive space is what we call the figure, and the negative space is the ground. It's the background. And a lot of times we think about that when we look at it. So right here, this is kind of the object and this is the background, right? When we were looking at just a pot on that doesn't have a shape around it or anything, this is also the figure and this is the ground. But because the ground doesn't have any limitations, we don't really see it as a shape or an object. But once it has limitations, like it's inside of the circle, this black shape also becomes a shape of its own, right? So if we make this pot white, for example, you can kind of tell you're focusing maybe even more on the shape that this black area makes. And that's also important. That's also part of your designing. And that's why I feel like this shorter pot fits better than this taller pot. Because when I look at the figure ground here, this black shape does not feel as consistent or like it's filled out as well as it is when I have this pot on there. You guys see what I mean? So you got to think about the shape that's being created once you put your object in the shape as well. Okay. So that's a big part of symbol design. Now, of course, you can keep it simple like this, just black and white, and then you know that this functions in any other color. This way you could actually have your shape be the negative space, so to speak, or the white, the cutout, and you could have it just have a green, you know, the symbol, the shape or the circle is green instead, and then the pot kind of becomes a cutout, right? Or if you want to use two colors, you could even do it something like this. But the fewer colors you use, again, the simpler it is and the easier it's going to be to recognize. Now, another thing that you might want to do, depending on how you're using your icon, is that you might want to make the shape that you created here, the symbol itself, so the plant pot, a cutout. And then that's is why it's important that it's just one shape. So if you select both of these and you go to this Pathfinder panel again, and you go to this little symbol here that's called divide, or you can use, I think, this one here. Sometimes you just have to test it. Now, this one right here takes out the inside object. So now you can see that this is just a shape of its own. If I move it over the top of that, you see the black through. So that's actually a hole, not a white pot. Okay, so then when could this be interesting? Like if this is your icon and you're using it on a website, maybe you can use it on top of imagery and then you see some of the imagery through this hole, right? Exactly. Or you could fill this shape with an image, and then the little pot sticks out as a whole. So that could be something useful. You can also, if we go back to before we did that, you can also use this divide tool. And if you do that, you actually won't lose that pot. You have to ungroup them though. And then you can take that pot out, but then it leaves a hole in the circle. So then you have that same object again, but you also have your pot. Okay, so just a few little Illustrator tools that you can remember to use that will be helpful to you as you design your icons. All right, so does this help you guys as you're thinking about what you're gonna do for your icons and how to create them? Now let's see, if this is my yard and garden symbol, let's say that for the paint section, I'm gonna do a paintbrush, and I just use simple shapes again to kind of create that. You know, here's the bottom of the paintbrush, and I'm just gonna use just these basic shapes, and then I can modify them from there. And this is the handle. We're just going to be kind of rough now because we want to keep going. But let's say that this is the beginning of the paintbrush. I might do something like add a line here to separate that, because I kind of want to, maybe I'll double it up, you know, so that you can tell the bristles from the part. So does that help a little bit to kind of tell the bristles apart? I probably should find a reference image, right? Okay, so to me that helps because I see this little metal band right here. That's what really kind of separates the bristles from the handle. So go back to my design, and I'm going to make this, instead of a line, I'm going to actually draw another shape on top of it here. Make that white, so it kind of separates that. That kind of cuts it out. Maybe the other lines were better. I'll just move them up a little bit more. Okay, can you think of why I wouldn't want to make like all these tiny little bristles here at the bottom though?
Too distracting?
Too many details, right? And when you shrink that down, you're probably not even going to see them. Can you guys think of something else I might be able to do to make this look more like a paintbrush and not a butter churner? So, you know, even though I know that it's supposed to be a paintbrush, if you didn't know that it was a paintbrush, you might think it's a factory, you might think it's a plunger, you know, it could be a lot of different things. So if we look at the paintbrush right here, though, think of some of the characteristics of a paintbrush that could help. Okay, not as squared, okay? So with a paintbrush, the bottom part is flexible, right? So if I move on to this, and I use my anchor point tool right here, and maybe I will just kind of move this over a little bit. To kind of give it a little bit of a swoosh down here. Well, I don't want to swoosh the top though, so actually it's going to be better for me, I think, to have this as two different shapes. I can make a square top instead. All right, do you guys think that helps? Does that help make a paintbrush? I'd probably play with this a little bit more. I think it feels a little awkward, but it helped a little bit though, right?
Could you like make it do like a little small streak of paint, or would that be too much?
Yeah, I would try it and then see what you think. The problem is that I would probably have to have that be a different color, and so, you know, that might complicate things a little bit. But
understand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily like exactly how this turned out, but you guys get the drift. You know, sometimes just changing that shape just a little bit is really going to help. Now, can you guys see if there's, let's just pretend I'm all done with this and I've done all the little finer details that I wanted to do on it. Let's compare it to the pot and talk about those consistencies and lines and things. Do you see something that I could change on this paintbrush to make it feel more consistent with this pot shape? You see anything inconsistent? I'll give you hints like lines and curves and corners.
Well, I mean, the paintbrush itself.
Yeah, we're just looking at the paintbrush itself compared to the pot itself. So let's. Okay, yeah, you could dip it in green, but it's not the green color that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about just the shape itself. Yeah, I think we should use a circle for both of them, right? And I actually think that the best thing to do to begin with is once you decide what shape it's going to be in, make sure that you create 5 of those so that they're exactly the same size. Because you want to make sure that everything's consistent that way. I'm going to have to go out here and okay, so I could put it in a circle. Let me put that behind and give it a color so we can see. Okay, so I could put in a circle. I'd probably want to, you know, shrink it down a little bit. And you can see once I put in a circle, those white lines aren't going to work. I'm going to have to do something else there, right? Okay. The other thing I was thinking about is that, you know, all of these angles are pointed. They come to a sharp end. The pot does, the leaves do, right? Here we have sharp ends, but not here. This is not a sharp, this doesn't have sharp corners. So I can change that by using my direct selection tool and my anchor point tool. And I can just click that, kind of drag it out. Or I might just have to, I could actually, remember, what did I use for this? I used an ellipses. And so sometimes using the same type of tool is going to help you keep the same kind of shapes to things. So if I use an ellipses tool again, and then go here, click that little point again so that becomes sharp. Okay, maybe now this handle to the paintbrush feels like it has a little bit more connection to the leaves, right, than the other one did. Okay, yeah, a paint drip, that could be a good alternative because that could just be like a drop, right? Okay, so now with these lines, some of the changes I would probably have to make here is I'd have to either move this in, and then I would want to, you know, combine a couple of things, like I would select this and this and this black one, and I'd probably use my direct selection tool on these. And then I think I would these two to the back so I can see my lines. And then I would take my lines and I would make that paths again. And then maybe I would take those and divide that, ungroup it, and now I could take that out and it becomes the background instead. And I wasn't very careful because it looks like it's overlapping right there, but I can probably go in and take that out. So there's a little shape there that I would have to fix. But basically what I've done now is I've created 3 shapes here. I can group those together. And now those bands are actually part of the background. So if I move it out here, they become white. If I have them on a background, they take on the background color. So it's still only like one shape, so it's very simple, instead of having lines that I would have to color in right here. Okay, see what I'm doing? All right, and so if you want to have some kind of stroke or something maybe to your circle here, you could do that. Just remember that you want it to have some kind of consistency with some of the stroke weights that you have on the objects in here. So, you know, I would make it thick enough that it mimics like the width of this stroke, And if you have this line, you want that to be about the same thickness as the stroke or the line right here as the stem. That's going to create that consistency throughout as well. Now remember, if you have created a shape here, I can't remember what I've done here now. Are these two different shapes? Yeah. So I made a cutout, right? If I put a stroke on this cutout, it's going to stroke the inside, the hole as well. So be careful with that, because, you know, if that's not the effect that you want, make sure that you maybe save one that's not cut out. So if you want to kind of go back to the look of just having the pot in there and stroke the circle on its own, you can do that.
So let's say you're doing the wall, like you do Walmart, and you go to make your little icon circles.
Mm-hmm.
Would, like, say making a little sun that's the Walmart logo be too much for something like this?
If you're doing, to add you creating your own sun and putting it by the Walmart logo?
Well, I mean, like using the sun as the actual icon circle.
Oh,
and then just put your
yeah,
things
that could be a way to connect it. Yeah, that could be a way to connect it. You could do that. So instead of this circle, you would have that Walmart sun behind each one of the objects. You could do that.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before we leave our icon design topic? Does this kind of help you? Oh, hi, Raven. We've got lots of people kind of have joined us here since we started. Hakeem's here too. Welcome. All right. Okay, so you can play around with this a little bit. Just use your basic Illustrator tools. Try to stay away from gradients, shadows, any kind of those type of details, because again, they're, you know, they add complexity, and it just becomes a lot harder to handle or to deal with as an icon. Okay. All right, let's continue here, because we have still a few more things to talk about when it comes to human-centered design. Okay, so your quiz is mostly on that. It has 10 questions in it, and each question has a little bit of a reading, and then it has a question after that. And the readings cover some of the topics of human-centered design. Some of them are also in your readings for this week. Some of the articles that are in there in the media readings. But I kind of wanted to go over some of these things that are that you're going to be quizzed on in the lecture here too. So if we're not able to go through it in a lot of detail, you'll have the slides as well. So basically what human-centered design will tell you is that you don't have to be an expert in every specific industry to create a good design. You, instead of trying to be like, say for example, you're going to design something for a, you know, let's say like a water pump, okay? So you don't know anything about water pumps, but human-centered design thinking can replace some of that water pump knowledge with a knowledge of the process. And so if you just learn and understand the process of human-centered design, you can apply it to just about any kind of design project. And it could be a graphic design project, it could be a web design project, it could be an industrial design, it could be architecture, it could be fashion, it could be game design, any of those different topics that we mentioned in the discussion, right? Because basically what it is, it's problem solving. So the three main phases of human-centered design are inspiration, ideation, and implementation. And the basics of them is that they always start with the people. Always think of the user and what the user experience is. So during the inspiration phase, You immerse yourself in the user's life. You have empathy and understanding for what they're going through. And you learn directly from the people you're designing for. So instead of coming at it from the outside, you're coming at it from the inside. And this sometimes takes time. If you're a web designer, you have to use a lot of websites. You have to, be in that environment. And that's why looking at things when you're a graphic designer, just analyzing every sign and every pamphlet and every menu and everything that you look at, think about how it's been designed and think about how you would use it and how you would think about it. If you're going to design a menu, go to restaurants, look at different restaurant menus and see how people interact with them. In the ideation phase, you do prototyping, so you make samples and you get feedback and you iterate. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is where you generate tons of ideas. You build a bunch of prototypes and test them out. How is the menu folding? How is it going to fold this way, that way? How is it going to work? How does the website, how do you navigate from one page to another? How do the different buttons work? All of that kind of stuff. And then the third is the implementation phase. That's when you actually bring your solution to life. But you spend a lot of time over here in section 2. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about will kind of dwell in there, in that area. So one of the websites, or one of the articles rather, that's in your readings is from IDEO. And this is a company that kind of is the ones that have coined this technique of human-centered design. Let's see. I think in the media, one of the links talk about this, but I also think another good website for you guys to go to is their website itself. Okay, come here, Course Media. Okay, so this article right here talks about IDEO. And there's 6 steps to human-centered design. But if you go to their website itself, and it's just designkit.org, there's a lot of other kind of cool resources here. And I'm going to talk about some of these things that are on here. Specifically, the 7 different mindsets of a human-centered designer. And there are 5 steps that's kind of outlined over here in this article. Are to empathize. In other words, you have to understand your audience. Again, it starts with that, connecting with the people that are going to use your design. Step number 2 would be to define. You have to establish some point of view. And ideate, you start thinking about possible solutions. You prototype. You try out multiple solutions. You make samples or you test them out. And then, once you have several different prototypes, you can test these different ones too and see what people prefer and kind of get some feedback that way too. But there are 7 mindsets that they go over on their website that I think are really helpful. And these are things that we can think of as designers and kind of try to implement into the way that we work. And these mindsets are creative confidence, making it, failure, empathy, embracing ambiguity, optimism, and to iterate. So let's go through these a little bit one at a time. Creative confidence. Well, that's the belief that everyone is creative. And it's a way of understanding the world. It's not necessarily thinking, oh, I'm really good at painting or doing sculpture or that kind of stuff. It's about being creative, coming up with new ideas and thinking. There's a lot more creativity than just artistic talent, right? It's trusting your intuition as a designer and knowing that you have capabilities to come up with interesting and creative solutions. Having creative confidence means that you are confident enough to chase solutions that you might not have figured out yet. So even if you just kind of get a hunch and thinking there could be some good idea down this road, try it out. You know, one idea always generates another. So an idea doesn't have to be perfect to begin with. Solutions to big problems usually means that you do mistakes along the way. And if you have creative confidence, you don't give up just because one idea doesn't work. You keep going, you keep trying different things. And as you're trying different things, new innovations and new ideas will come along. And it can take time to build some of these ideas. But if you just try to come up with a perfect idea out of nothing to begin with, usually you won't be successful. So you start with small successes and then you build on to bigger ones. The next mindset is to make it, to test things and actually make something. And when you do that, it helps you kind of see where there are weaknesses and where there are strengths, and there's opportunities for new ideas and things that you didn't think about before you were starting to put it together. And that could even be something simple as when I was working on this design right here. You know, you run into things. Oh, this is not going to work because now it's a line. So what do I figure out? How do I find a solution to that? It's not just the big picture, it's part of the solution while you're designing as well. Okay, so you just have to work on it instead of just thinking, oh, I'm going to make a paintbrush. Start making that paintbrush, start designing it, start making shapes, and then see how they work together and test things out until it comes together the way that you want it to be. Other types of design, sometimes you have to make a prototype of something bigger. And you can evaluate it and then learn how to make it better. You can prototype anything at any stage of the process. It just means that you actually, instead of just thinking about it, you're actually doing something about it. So making it is getting the idea out of your head and into the hands of the people that you're looking to serve or the people that are working to design it. Failure is the other mindset. This is one of the best tools for learning. You have to be willing to start from a place of not knowing what the solution is going to be, and be willing to fail and make mistakes and redo things. And a lot of times by listening and thinking and building and refining, you will finally get something that works out. You probably heard the quote from Thomas Edison that says, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that it won't work," right? So, you know, keep on trying and keep on figuring it out. And every time something doesn't work, figure out why it didn't work. And then it's not a failure. Then it's just a learning tool, right? It's an inherent part of human-centered design. It's really the only way to get to that perfect solution. So when a human-centered designer gets something right, it's because you got it wrong first. So you have to go through that process of failure. Empathy is another mindset. And empathy is the capacity to step into another person's shoes and understand their lives. Yeah, it's about attitude, not aptitude. Exactly. Yeah, and if people didn't fail, we would never learn. That's right. Failure are the steps to results, basically, and to learning, right? And empathy is an important part of understanding the user, right? You have to step into people's shoes and understand their lives and what they're doing. And you have to solve the problems from their perspective. So, you know, keep the people in mind along with you in the design process. So if you're designing a user interface, think about exactly, you know, what type of people are going to use it. Are they holding things in their hands? You know, think about somebody using a kiosk at an airport, for example. They're probably going to have luggage and bags and holding things, right? So how easy is it to, you know, to touch and to use and to find things on that screen if you got a bunch of luggage with you, right? So, think about all of the other environmental factors that go around a person using the design that you're creating. That helps you see the world and the opportunities and everything that you could do to help out the user through a new powerful lens. And it opens up all kinds of new creative possibilities, and allows you to leave behind preconceived ideas and outmodeled ways of thinking. And I think Apple is one of the companies that are really good about this. You guys are, now that you're using Macs, are probably getting all familiar with the user-friendliness of Apple products and how they really think about, like, what is it like to be on this computer, to use this keyboard, to, hold the phone in your hand, to, all of those kinds of things. That is what you have to think about. What is it like to be the user? So you have to have empathy to understand that. Embracing ambiguity is another mindset for a human-centered designer. And ambiguity, which I have a hard time saying, means inexactness or being open to more than one interpretation. And so sometimes that can be something that as a designer we have a little bit of a hard time with. We want things to be exact and we want things to be defined. But if we embrace ambiguity, then we are more able to think about new ideas and different options. Steve Jobs was, he thought from a very human-centered approach. So, studying the way that he worked and he thought about things will also help you understand this concept of human-centered design. If you are embracing ambiguity, you can start from a place of not knowing the answer to the problem. You don't get too frustrated if you don't know exactly what the end result is going to be. You're going to get there along the way. It helps you pursue a lot of different ideas and arrive at unexpected solutions. And that's, for example, why I suggested that you make lots of different options for yourself right here. And maybe create icons for a few of these so that once you look at them all together, you can see which 5 is going to feel more cohesive. Is it going to be the one where I have a paintbrush or I have a paint bucket? And you won't know that to begin with because you haven't designed them all yet. So you have to kind of accept that ambiguity and create several of them and then look at them and decide which ones you want to use. Some of this work you can probably do next week as well, though. So don't feel like everything has to be completely finished this week. The other thing is you might want to, have the options of putting it in a square and in a circle. And then, once you start working with your interface, maybe you prefer one to the other. So keep your options open. That's basically what the ambiguity is about. Don't cling to ideas any longer than you have to, because there's always going to be more ideas. Discard bad ideas or keep a couple of ideas around for a while and compare them to see which ones are actually going to work the best in the end, because you might not know to begin with, right? The ambiguity is not knowing the answer, and that helps you innovate and be more innovative and frees you to pursue an answer that you might not have thought of to begin with. So, keep your mind open. Maybe I started out with a square or a circle, but as I work on all 5 icons, I see that, oh no, maybe I'm going to use the triangle shape instead, or maybe the square with the straight corners is actually going to be better. So, keep all of those options open and don't tie yourself down to one thought too quickly. Optimism is something else that's important. We have to believe that there's a solution to the problem. We have to believe that there is an option for progress, and that helps us be more creative. It helps us push on when we hit dead ends, and sometimes we have to scrap an idea and start all the way over, but that's okay because we learn things along the way. And so that's kind of where we get our energy from as designers, I think, is to be optimistic and know that you know, even if things aren't looking great right now, if I keep working on it, some good solution is going to come along the way. And there's always constraints, but those constraints sometimes push you towards an unexpected solution. So, for example, maybe you're saying like, oh, dang it, why do I have to do Walmart? I wish I could do something else. But if you could do whatever you wanted, you're not going to have those constraints that kind of push you to be more creative, right? And every problem is solvable. You kind of have to keep that in the back of your mind. And then a reiteration, okay? So a reiterate means to perform something repeatedly, and that's why we've repeated it 3 times here. And if you keep doing things over and over again, and getting feedback from people, that is, again, a way that you kind of refine things down to the details. It helps you refine and improve your work. It helps you try a variety of different approaches, and it keeps you flexible and responsive. It helps you focus on getting the idea and the details right when you keep doing things over and over again. And it gives you an opportunity to get things wrong and then go, okay, it didn't work that time, so I'll try it again. And the next time you learn something else, and then you try it again. And maybe then it turns out better. So it allows you to keep learning. So don't be frustrated with having to revise things or do things over and over again. It's actually part of the design process. All right, so that kind of mindset helps us with some real problem solving. The best human-centered innovations are originated from specific needs, not consumer trends. They're often spurred by ideas that adapt something that already exists to a contemporary need. And many times they're discovered while the designers are putting themselves in the user's position. And this TED Talk that's in your media as well. Let's see, what time is it? We could just have 10 minutes. I think we could maybe listen to about a couple of minutes of it. It's here. Let's go to it. And let's see here. I've got a few minutes selected here. Let me see what other slides I have. Yeah, I think we'll have time to listen to him talk about this for just a second. So I'm just going to do a little 2-minute clip here. Let me see if I can start it. And let me find the, let's see here. I need to let it start here before I can move this over to about 5:42. You probably want to listen to this whole thing because this is a pretty cool guy and somebody who's pretty well known in design circles. So let's start right here and see, he's talking about creative confidence, and he is kind of talking about an example. This is not like a graphic or a web designer. This is a guy who was more of an industrial designer, but he kind of had a new way of thinking, and hopefully that you can figure out some way to relate that to the things that you come in contact with. Maybe not in this project, but in some time in your design life. You guys good with listening to this for a couple of minutes? All right. Yeah, I'm going to go back just a few.
You can take them through a series of steps, kind of like a series of small successes, and they turn kind of fear into familiarity. And they surprise themselves. The transformation is amazing.
Okay, so this is people that were thinking that they didn't have any creativity. And this could happen to, you know, even somebody who feels like they're in a creative field, but sometimes we all feel like we're lacking in creativity, right?
I couldn't hear the
You can't hear?
no, I
Let's see.
can't.
Let's see, I think I need to click this here. Here, so let me go back a couple more seconds here so that everything makes sense in context here.
Something that we've seen happen over, you know, for the
Can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay. I can even turn up the volume here a little bit. Okay.
last 30 years, that we could take people who had the fear that they weren't creative, and we could take them through a series of steps, kind of like a series of small successes, and they turned kind of fear into familiarity, and they surprised themselves. The transformation is amazing. We see at the D School now all the time, people from all different kinds of disciplines, they think of themselves as only analytical, and they come in and they go through the process, our process, they build confidence, and now they think of themselves differently. And they're totally emotionally excited about the fact that they walk around thinking of themselves as a creative person. Right? So I thought one of the things I'd do today is take you through, and show you what this journey looks like. To me, that journey looks like Doug Dietz. Doug Dietz is a technical person. He designs medical imaging equipment, large medical imaging equipment. He's worked for GE, and he's had a fantastic career. But at one point, he had a moment of crisis. He was in the hospital looking at one of his MRI machines in use when he saw a young family and his little girl. And that little girl was crying and was terrified. And Doug was really disappointed to learn that nearly 80% of the pediatric patients in this hospital had to be sedated in order to deal with this MRI machine. Right? And this was really disappointing to Doug because before this time, he was proud of what he did. You know, he was saving lives with this machine. But it really hurt him to see the fear that this machine caused in kids. About that time, he was at the D School at Stanford taking classes. He was learning about our process, about design thinking, about empathy, about iterative prototyping. And he would take this new knowledge and do something quite extraordinary. He would redesign the entire experience of being scanned. And this is what he came up with. He turned it into an adventure for the kids. He painted the walls and he painted the machine, and he got the operators retrained by people who know kids, like, children's museum people. And now, so when the kid comes, it's an experience. And they talk to him about the noise and the movement of the ship. And when they come, they say, okay, you're going to go into the pirate ship, but be very still because we don't want the pirates to find you. Right? And the results were super dramatic. Right? So from something like 80% of the kids needing to be sedated to something like 10% of the kids needing to be sedated. And the hospital and GE were happy too, because you didn't have to call the anesthesiologist all the time, they could put more kids through the machine in a day. So the quantitative results were great. But Doug's results that he cared about were much more qualitative. He was with one of the mothers waiting for her child to come out of the scan, and when the little girl came out of her scan, she ran up to her mother and said, "Mommy, can we come back tomorrow?" Right?
Big difference, right? And it wasn't really a complex thing that he had to do. He didn't have to redesign the technical aspects of this machine at all. He just had to think about it from an empathetic view, from a human-centered view. He had to think about it from the view of the child that had to go through it. And then he came up with a solution that took care of that whole problem. Kind of cool, right? So this is what human-centered design thinking is all about. It's, sometimes it's big changes, but oftentimes it's just thinking about it from a different angle than exactly just like, he was probably just used to thinking, calculation and calibration, and, this is how it's going to function, and this is how it's going to show the scan to the person, the medical documents, and you have to have this thing in here so the person is still, so the scan looks right. And I don't understand all of that technical stuff, but his creative thinking and his creative confidence that he gained from having these design thinking skills helped him create a machine that worked so much better and was so much more productive than the one that he had before. All right. So these are some of the things that really make a difference in the design world. All right. So you can listen to that whole entire talk if you want to later. All right. So these are some other examples that are interesting, I think. Human-centered ideas can come from random exposure or from repeated experience. So once you start thinking this way, people that think this way and people that learn to think this way can come up with great ideas just in their everyday lives. For example, the reflective things on the side of a road, they were invented by a man that almost hit a raccoon crossing the street, but he saw his glowing little eyes show up, and so he was able to swerve out of the way. And then he realized, well, those, you know, if I could make like little glowing things along the side of the road, that can help people drive a lot more safely in roads that aren't lit by traffic lights or anything, you know, or by road lights. So, you know, how many lives do you think, you know, the little markers that light up when the headlights hit it, how many lives do you think that saves all the time, right? It's a thing that's just commonly used on all the roads. You can see a curve when it's coming up, all of those kinds of things, right? So amazing stuff. The guy that came up with Velcro, well, he got the idea when he was out walking his dog and some birds got stuck to the dog. And he was struggling with getting them off. And then he realized how these birds actually work with their little teeth things and that they stick to the softer fur of the dog. And voila, Velcro. And how much do we use Velcro in our everyday lives? And how helpful is that, right? And other things like shipping containers and cornflakes, you know, all kinds of different things have come up with just people thinking of a better way to do what they have to do. Cornflakes came from a guy that was visiting his brother in the hospital that had dietary restrictions, and he was a food scientist, and so he tried to come up with something that he could easily digest and that would keep and all of that kind of stuff. And so he came up with cornflakes. It wasn't just somebody saying, oh, I am going to make a breakfast cereal. It came up from a need. And so did shipping containers. It was a guy that had a shipping business, and he was tired of unloading and, you know, big bulky wooden containers and trying to stack them, and they didn't fit and they didn't have the same size and they were all complex and everything. And so after fighting with that for many, many years, he finally came up with a better solution. So that creative thinking is constantly making lives better for people all over the world. All right, so prototypes and brainstorming are an important part of this process. And remember that the quality is not as important as just figuring out how it works. I don't know if you guys have been in, you've probably been in the design class that does a trifold. You've designed a trifold pamphlet before, right? Okay. So the difference between just designing a trifold pamphlet on a flat InDesign document or taking a piece of paper and actually folding it up into threes so that you can see and just hold it and realize, okay, this flap is first, then I open it up, and then I open up the next flap, and this is how it is, and this is where the back is. And having that little prototype is going to help you know which panel is going to be the front, which panel is going to be the back, right? And how it functions when it's folded up. That's something that's very hard to kind of get through your mind when you're just looking at a flat InDesign document. So that prototype is really helping, especially when it comes to packaging or anything that folds or is three-dimensional. So remember to test those things and revise those things and get feedback on the prototypes as well. All right, so we're going to have to wrap things up here. There is, you know, two different ways to approach design. The traditional one, doing online research and having statistics and do tests and surveys, compared to the human-centered way of talking to people in the environment that you're designing for, which is a lot more effective. The traditional design approach guards ideas for individual opportunities and doesn't want to share things because maybe somebody will steal my idea and that kind of thing. The human-centered designer shares things and learns from other people, and that way things grow and improve. In a traditional atmosphere, you finish the design process and then you spend a lot of money on making one final quality prototype, and then you test it, and then you have to pay a lot of money when it doesn't work, or you have to do a recall when it doesn't work or whatever. But the human-centered design approach has rough prototypes tested all along the way, so they know when it finally gets to production that there's going to be as few issues and problems as possible. All right, so I had to rush through that end a little bit, but like I said, a lot of that information is in your other articles as well. So before we leave, instead of having the calendar meetings on Friday, I'm just going to have an open time in the Zoom room, so right here in the classroom, from 12 to 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So I'll just be in here, so if you have any questions or want me to look over anything or give you feedback on anything, you can just pop in. Or if you are not available during that time, you can, again, just like before, email me with files or questions, and then I'll just record it when I go over it and send you a little link to the recording, okay? Remember, Christy is there to help you as well, and so is the Student Success Center. Do you guys feel ready to take on, finalize the final assignments for this week? Hope so. Okay. All right. Yep. You might have to go, go back through, but I think the slides and the things that I talked about human-centered design, if you go through those, you should be able to have, all the things that you need to know for the quiz. And again, the assignment is basically just the plan. So if you check the rubric, and you have your things in there, then you should do fine for that. You can always polish things up when you create it next week. But again, it's mostly just a plan for this week. All right. Okay. Well, that finishes our lecture for this week. And next week, we're going to talk about presenting your interface design. And that should be UI, not IU. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. And maybe I'll see you in tomorrow in the lab. All right. Good night, everyone.